don't really focus on how many years recovery I have, whether it's 46 or 47. I took a job running a wholesale house.
And this is all while you're drinking.
A lot of drinking. Elmer calls me and he says, I want you in the conference room tomorrow at 10 o'clock in Atlantic City. And he said, you are a very productive employee. He said, but if you don't stop drinking, I'm going to fire you. You have 3 days to tell me which rehab you're going to or give me your letter of resignation.
Wow.
I couldn't imagine first going to a rehab. I couldn't imagine, number two, not drinking.
What realization you had when you elected to make a change?
I got more comfortable with the fact that I was where I should be.
Labeled a slow learner.
I always felt a little bit
Always felt
different.
like there was something wrong with me.
embarrassed.
Wasn't ready to see myself.
I can't go any
Don't
lower.
sell yourself short.
Uncovering all those feelings. Everything was lifted at that moment.
This really wasn't about not drinking.
Hi, this is Corey Raven talking to you from South Florida. Welcome to Crosstalk Podcasts. I want to say hello to my co-host, Irene. Hi.
Hello.
How you doing? We have a great guest today. We have Mike T is here. And Mike is I hate to say it, but you're an old timer at this point.
An old timer in this program, yes.
Yes, but in real life, no.
No, in real life, no, not an old timer.
Exactly.
I haven't caught up with you yet, Corey.
That's right. Every year you get closer. Well, welcome, Mike. I'm so happy that you're here. You traveled a long way, traveled from North Carolina to get to our studio down here in Florida.
South Carolina, right outside of
South
Hilton
Carolina.
Head. We live in a little town called Bluffton, South Carolina.
Okay.
Thank you so much for coming. I'm just so excited for you to be here. I mean, we forged a friendship a year and a half ago, I would say. You know, and I'm amazed at your recovery. I'm amazed at your, just the way you speak. So I think that this will be a great episode.
Well, it's a privilege to be here. It really is.
Mike, you started this path on recovery, and in what year?
1978.
1978. That is really, really impressive.
So how many years is that sober? Because I can't do math right now.
Well, I say it's 46, but it's really more than that. I don't really focus on how many years recovery I have. It's, whether it's 46 or 47, doesn't mean that much to me as an anniversary. Mm-hmm. What means so much to me is meeting people like you. What means to me is all the blessings that have taken place in my life for all these years. And so this is just part of it. Being here is another blessing.
So how did it start for you? Did you grow up in the North or in South Carolina?
I grew up in Massachusetts. I spent my first 12 years there. My father had a successful business there, and my father was an alcoholic, and so was my mother. And we grew up in this little Norman Rockwell kind of community, little Cape Cod home. I thought it was big. I actually went back to see it recently. It's not as big as I thought it was in my mind. But we, country clubs and nice cars and all that stuff. I was 12 years old and I came home from school. I actually walked out the back door and across the field, and that's where my school was. When I say this is a Norman Rockwell kind of town, I had my ice skates over my shoulder, my hockey stick, and a puck in my pocket when I went to school in the morning during the winter, and we'd go down to a place called Marshall's Pond and play hockey until it was too dark to see and then go home. But anyway, I came home after school one day, and there's a 40-foot house trailer parked on the side of the house, and all the furniture in the house is being auctioned off by this man, and there's people out there buying our furniture.
No notice.
No. And I said, Mom, what's going on? And she said, we're moving. I said, where are we moving to? She said, California. I said, when? She said, in a couple of days. And I said, what are they doing with our furniture? She said, we're selling it. We can't take it with us. So it actually sounds more traumatic now than it was then. I think when you're 12 years old, you just roll with it, kind of. But
I mean, you must have missed your friends and like the idea you just left playing hockey, you know, and it's like,
Yeah, and all of a sudden
Would you get in the car, drive to California?
my father bought this heavy-duty station wagon and pulled this trailer cross country. Took us a couple of months
a couple of months to cross country
because he'd stop, and we
and there's no GPS.
no GPS. And my sister, who was maybe a year old, I held her most of the way across country.
Wow.
And anyway, we ended up in California, and a whole different environment, and living in a trailer from this nice home with people that worked in the house and the whole bit. Now we're living in a house trailer. Was a little bit of a shock.
Was this a consequence of their alcoholism?
It's a consequence of my father losing his business, and he was a brilliant man. He was a great athlete, extremely intelligent, no formal education, but he was one of these guys that really didn't need a formal education. He could do anything.
Yeah.
But his alcoholism and his gambling and
The isms, as we
the
call
isms,
them.
yeah. So we end up in Anaheim in a trailer, and then we moved into a house, and I played ball, I made friends, I was a pretty good athlete. And then in my sophomore year of high school, I'm told we're going back to the East Coast. So I had all these friends,
Oh,
and we go back to the East Coast, and I get enrolled in a high school in Newark, Delaware. And then we got in the car and we went to Newark, Delaware, stayed with relatives who had 5 kids. There were four. I had 3 siblings. Absolute nightmare.
So 9 children.
9 children
With
and,
not
and,
enough
and
beds.
four adults in a house temporarily until the house that my father bought
right.
was
Was
finished.
this again a consequence of alcoholism?
Yes, he had every kind of job you can imagine on the West Coast. So he was given an opportunity to have a job on the East Coast. So back we go. I end up in this high school, and I'm there for 3 months, and then I get into the new house that they bought. I'm in another high school.
It's
And
fourth
so-
school.
Yeah. So now it's the second half of my sophomore year. I'm in this new school, and the football coach had already come to our house. He knew I was coming he wanted me to play for them, and so I made friends again. All these guy friends, and I also had the first love of my life in high school, a girl by the name of Sally, and we just had a great group. I finally landed someplace where I felt like I was, but that's really when alcohol got into my life, way back.
You were old enough at that point where it was part of the
Yeah.
age that you were at.
Yeah, we were drinking, when I was a senior, and then I went off to college, and it was like, forget it.
When you were a senior, were you drinking in school? What did it look like?
I actually came to school one time loaded.
Yeah.
And the geometry teacher spoke to me, not that day. Well, he did speak to me that day. He said, I want to talk to you tomorrow. He says, there's no point in talking to you today. I said, okay. And the next day, I was one of his students. He spoke to me and he said, you know the standardized geometry test that you just took, that everybody took? And I said, yeah. He said, you don't really pay attention in class. He said, you hand in some of your homework assignments. And he said, of all the people in this school that took that test, you were number 1.
Wow.
He said, what's wrong with you?
Can you imagine what you'd be handing in if you weren't doing all that stuff?
Well, I don't know. Maybe, I don't know. I have no idea. But I guess my point is not that I was a good math student or could do math. My point is that that's when alcohol really started to take a hold of my life. My senior year, I graduated. We all went to a senior trip, and my father gave me a quarter Smirnoff to take with me on my senior trip. I mean, really?
Yeah.
I mean, we got a 2-hour drive to Rehoboth Beach, and I've got a quarter
They've
Smirnoff.
at least given you a handle.
Yeah.
God bless him. He had a lot of issues and a lot of baggage, and I'm not blaming him. I've forgiven him a long time ago.
Right.
He was trying to be, you know,
The cool
a
dad.
good dad. He didn't know what that looked like.
Yeah, no, he didn't know what it was like, and then of course college was a total train wreck, and I never finished college because of that. Actually got in trouble with one of the starting players on the football team. We ended up getting in a fight with these fraternity guys, and they said something nasty to us, and then they regretted having said that, and then we got in trouble. And they actually said that we took money from them, but we never did. So we got
Trouble with the law?
we got in trouble with the school. So
Okay.
the school said you're gonna have to take a semester off.
Oh, no.
So that was during the Vietnam War, and that was during the draft. This was pre-lottery. It went from draft to lottery. Well, this was during the draft, and man, I can't believe the government was this efficient. They're not efficient.
They
with
knew you
anything.
weren't in school immediately.
Yeah, I lost my deferment, and within about a month or two, I got a letter that said, "Come to Philadelphia and take your physical." And I said, "Boy, this is it." Like I said, I was a pretty good athlete, and I knew I'd pass the physical. And of course, I did. I went to Philadelphia, and I did. And on the way back from Philadelphia, I get back close to Newark, and I pass a naval recruiting station, and it sort of clicks in my head. You know, maybe the chances of you staying alive on a ship are higher than walking through a rice paddy with an M16.
Yeah. Oh, that
So
war
I
was
pulled in.
brutal.
That war was brutal.
Yeah.
And, you know, during college, we had the SDS stuff going on, where all the protests, and at night, the newsreels in those days were really graphic. I mean, guys getting blown up. I mean,
Oh, my God.
so it was a tough time, and
That's so. I can't even imagine seeing that on TV, like on a commercial, right?
Well, I mean, it wasn't a commercial. It was on the 6 o'clock news or the 11 o'clock news.
Yeah.
You'd see these horrible images. So you went and did you enlist in the
yeah.
Navy?
Well, I said, "What's this Naval Reserve thing?" There's a big chief petty officer sitting in there, and I said, "Chief, what's this Naval Reserve thing all about?" He said, "Well, son, if you can get through boot camp," and I, okay. Then you've got 2 years of active duty, and then you have to go to some meetings. And I said, "Okay, sign me up." And he said, "Well, just a minute. You have to pass our test." And I said, "Well, no disrespect to you, Chief, or the U.S. Navy, but I can pass your test. Just give it to me." And of course, he gave it to me. I passed the test, and 2 weeks later, I'm in the Navy, and I'm staying at my mother's. And while I'm staying there, my mother says to me, "There is this Master Sergeant somebody on the phone for you." Of course, that was the day of, the phone on the wall.
Uh-huh.
And I get on the phone, and he says, are you Michael Turner? And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "You need to report to Philadelphia next week. You're in the Army now." And I said, "Well, I'm not coming." He said, what did you say?" And I said, "I'm not coming." He said, "We'll come get your ass." And I said, B48 81 37. He said, "Is that your service number?" And I said, "It is." I said, "You can't have me." So I was a couple weeks away from, maybe being an infantryman in the Army. So I didn't realize what a blessing that was at the time. I certainly do now.
Right.
And 2 years of active duty and way too much drinking, out of control stuff.
And you're not supposed to drink when you're in the Navy, right?
Not shipboard, but you pull into a port and get liberty. We were in the Med, and oh my God, I took a job running a wholesale house in New Jersey.
And this is all while you're drinking.
A lot of drinking.
Okay, so you're high functioning.
Well, look what he did on the geometry test.
So I interviewed for this job in New Jersey to run this business. They had 8 or 9 locations, and I was going to be the branch manager of this one location. I don't know how he found out, but the president of the company says to me, he said, "There's one thing that's come up in your background. Do you have a drinking problem?" I said, "I don't know where that would have come up, Elmer." I said, "Really?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "No, there is no problem." Well, they hired me. I lied. They hired me. Fast forward. So the deal at this company was really a good deal. He said 25% of the net profit is yours. My brother and I take 75%. You get 25%. You have the opportunity to be an entrepreneur and understand your marketplace and run this company as you see fit to generate the most profit possible out of this branch. He said, that's the good news. He said, the bad news is this branch has been losing money for the past 2 years, and if you don't turn it around, we're going to close it.
Challenge.
So I said, okay. So I worked hard, drinking like crazy, but working hard, and made it a very successful branch, maybe the most profitable branch in the company.
Wow.
So about 3 years later, I get a phone call from Elmer Lowenstein. Elmer calls me and he says, "I want you in the conference room tomorrow at 10 o'clock in Atlantic City." Just the way he said it, I knew this was trouble. I said, "Okay, Elmer." So I drove to Atlantic City. I walk into the conference room. He's sitting there. He said, "Sit down." I said, "Okay."
What year are we in?
We are in 1978. I sit down and he says, he said, "Close the door." I closed the door. He said, "Sit down." I said, "Okay." He said, "You are the highest paid employee we've ever had, except me and my brother. We own this company." And he said, "You are a very productive employee." He said, "But if you don't stop drinking, I'm going to fire you." He said, "You have 3 days to tell me which rehab you're going to, or give me your letter of resignation." He said, "This meeting is over. Goodbye." He got up and walked out of the room and left me sitting there.
In his own office.
Wow.
Yeah. And I'm sitting there saying, what? I mean, I couldn't imagine first going to a rehab. I couldn't imagine, number 2, not drinking.
That's what I was thinking.
Was there though in your mind, like, as a high functioning person who's made this business profitable, was there a piece of you that was like, I'm not an alcoholic? Or was it like, I really need to now someone's found me out?
Well, I knew I'd had a DUI. I mean, I was doing things in this branch I should have never done. And they let me get away with a lot of stuff they never should have let
Like
me
what
get
kind
away
of stuff?
Well, I had one of my employees driving me around. He was my chauffeur. I mean, because why? Because I lost my license.
He didn't even give you a chance to be angry.
No, he just walked out of the room.
So what'd you do?
I went to a local in Cape May County, New Jersey. There was a place in Cape May Courthouse where there was a guy that was in charge of alcohol and drug addiction.
Like a social worker?
Like a social worker who was in the program. His name was Art Rudolph. I still remember his name. It just came to me. It was almost 50 years ago. And he told me about this place in Pennsylvania called Chit Chat Farms. I said, "What? Chit Chat Farms?" I'm thinking, oh my God, this is getting worse. Now you're sending me to some farm.
Yeah, in Pennsylvania, in the middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania.
In the middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
So I was making a lot of money then. I had a family. I had 2 children. I felt I was always responsible to my children and my wife, and financially take care of everything and not let them down. So I went. And I thought, maybe this place, I knew nothing about rehabs, of course.
I think they were new, right?
Yeah,
At that
well,
point.
I mean, who knew about rehabs in 78? I certainly didn't.
Right.
And the idea that someone would call you an alcoholic in 1978, you thought of those people with a brown paper bag,
Right. Homeless.
or whatever.
If you think stigma is bad today, being an alcoholic in 78, you would hide that. Today, Crosstalk exists because we want to come out of the, shadows. We want to tell people it's possible to have a happy life, and, it doesn't matter. You had a problem with drugs or alcohol? Okay, good. So people have problems with everything. But
not
those
only-
days, it was different.
The connotation was really bad.
Yep.
Well, also that, half of our guests have been successful. It's like, oh my God, all these successful people coming out of the shadows, like everyone's affected.
But in those days, it wasn't like that.
Right.
Those days, it was very much behind the curtain.
So I thought maybe this rehab, because I didn't know I had no idea what was going to happen to me. I said, maybe they'll teach me how to drink. Maybe I'll get an education about what this alcoholism thing is. And because they'll give me some ideas about how I can take care of myself and,
Drink like a regular person.
drink like a regular person. And so I got there, and the lady in admissions, this was the end of November, and the lady in admissions said, well, your discharge date is December 27th or something like that. And I said, well, I'm not leaving December 27th. And she said, what do you mean? I said, the 25th is Christmas. I have to be home with my family. She said, well, you will not have met your commitment if you leave 2 days early. And I said, well, it doesn't make any difference. I'm leaving. So, of course, I didn't leave. And I really struggled for the first 2 weeks that I was there, trying to understand what they were talking about. And after about 2 weeks, this is really the first blessing that I can think of. I surrendered. I just was so tired. I was so tired of just fighting this thing, and so tired of being in this darkness that alcohol created for me, and doing things and saying, that's not me. That isn't me. That's somebody else.
For people listening that don't really get the concept of surrender, could you go into that a little bit more and tell us what that felt like? That is to say, what realization you had when you elected to make a change?
Well, I'll tell you a story that I don't really talk about too much, and the reason I don't talk about it too much is when people hear it, they might say, well, yeah. In the dormitory where I stayed, this was in the day of payphones. And there was a bank of payphones down at the end of the corridor. And you were allowed, after you were there X number of days, you were allowed to make a phone call. So if you were in your room in this dormitory, it was like a dormitory in college.
Right.
People playing grab ass, whatever. It was people yelling, phones going, whatever. So I'm sitting up in bed. My roommate, for some reason, is not in the room. So I'm all alone.
You're looking at this
And I'm
Bible.
looking at this Bible.
Okay.
And I hear my name. And like I said, I'm taking a shot at this. And it wasn't like someone spoke my name. It was in such a way that it wasn't a song, but it was a different kind of way of saying Michael that I'd ever heard before. And it startled me. And I got out of bed. I was fully dressed, but I went out to the corridor thinking someone said something to me. the corridor was empty. There was nobody on the payphones.
Wow.
There was nothing going on. And I thought, wow, what is this? And none of that, believe me, I remember it like it was yesterday, but none of it really made any sense for years later. And I realized what was going on. As my spiritual life grew, because I was sober, I always believed in God.
And that's why I wanted to ask you if you grew up with, you know, a religious family or semi, you know, they introduced you to it.
They introduced me to the Catholic Church, and I went through all the appropriate sacraments as a young boy. So I didn't have a problem with believing in God. I believed in God, but I really had no spiritual life until I got sober. And so it was around that time, Corey, you said, what was the surrender all about? I started to do a little bit of an inventory about where I'd been in the last 5 or 10 years and the things that had taken place in my life, and understood that maybe I didn't have to live that way. And I got more comfortable with the fact that I was where I should be. And I relaxed more about it. And so the last 2 weeks that I was there, it was just, I mean, it was just a great experience.
And you missed Christmas.
I missed Christmas. I came home 2 days after Christmas.
Yeah.
And of course, my children were there, but
That's all right.
but when I was there, Catherine, Karen, and myself, and Rosie Kearney,
Yeah.
we'd walk across the street because it was a monastery across the street in those days, and we'd go to Mass and come back. And I developed a great friendship with Rosie Kearney. She used to come down to Wildwood during the summer, and I'd always make sure I visited with her and took her out to dinner. And as years went by, it was still Chit Chat Farms. They would ask me to come up and speak at an event, and Catherine Karen would actually have me stay in her home right there on campus.
Oh, wow.
So I got to be friends with Catherine, and
Catherine was the woman, the pioneer kind of this place.
Richard's.
Richard and Karen.
Karen.
Richard Karen was an alcoholic, and as part of his program, he would actually go to the prisons, and he would take people into his house. And his wife Catherine finally said, look, you can't do this anymore. We've got to have some place to do this. And he bought this old hotel in Wernersville. And
Such a cool story.
yeah, and so that was Chit Chat Farms, which now is Karen and a much bigger organization. So that was 1978. That was the that I came home, and they told, you know, the aftercare people gave me instructions. They said, go to meetings, do something at the meetings, make the coffee, put out the literature, do something. And I felt really awkward about it because I lived in this small little town called Cape May, New Jersey. And I would actually walk down Washington Street. We had this big old Victorian home that I rehabbed. And 3 blocks down, there was Franklin Street and a church, typical church where there's an AA meeting, a little parish house next to it. And I'd make the coffee and put out the literature and everything and think, oh my God, I hope nobody sees me walking into this place.
Wow.
It was that kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And anyway, I actually, at this business that I, working for Elmer Lowenstein, and God bless you, Elmer, because you know, I don't know what your motivations were. I think I know what they were, but
That's what you said to him?
well, you know, I got to call him. I called him about 15, 20 years later, and I left that company and bought a company. And I used to actually buy supply. I bought an electrical contract. I'm not an electrician, but I bought an electrical contracting company. Was one of my customers, came to me and said, you can't work for these people. I said, what are you talking about? I said, you know, I'm making X number of dollars. It's a huge amount of money. He said, you're not going to be happy working for someone else. You have to be in business for yourself. And I said, well, maybe an opportunity will come along. And he said, well, I want you to buy my business. And I ended up buying his business. And then I ended up buying material from Elmer's company.
You know, these people that come in our way, they're like, they're people that are messengers. They help guide us. And he was a good guy who wanted to see you succeed, and he knew he was going to be okay also. One of the questions that we usually ask, you know, before we close an interview, Irene is actually the one who asks this better than me.
He opens the show episode and I close it, right? So if you could go back in time and tell yourself anything, what would it be? What age would you picture yourself? It could be any age you want. What age do you picture in your mind, and what would you tell yourself?
So if I could, in other words, you're asking me if I could change something?
Well, maybe not change. Maybe it won't necessarily change you, but something that you could tell yourself that you wish you knew. You wish you.
If I can try
Please.
to, you know,
Thank
because obviously this question is a stumper for both of us, because I stay away from it myself. But actually, the question is as follows, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong. That knowing what you now know, with all the information you've obtained, all the learning you've been able to absorb during your life, what kind of advice would you give young Mike if you were to have the opportunity to speak to young Mike and tell him something that might help him in his journey forward? What kind of advice might you give young Mike?
That's a hard question
Yeah.
because I think young Mike needed to get hurt. Young Mike never would have got to Karen without hurting himself. I don't think I could have stopped young Mike from hurting himself and hurting others early on. I think in my sobriety, what I would have told myself, Irini, in my early sobriety is to forgive myself, to not carry around a lot of guilt about what I did, and to associate those deeds. Not, I didn't kill anybody or I didn't rob any banks or anything, but my behavior was off the charts, and I used to carry that around and feel guilty about myself, and I associate it all now with the addiction.
Yeah.
And I learned that the real Mike is the Mike that's here now, and the Mike that's been blessed to be with a wife for 40 years and build businesses and
Be a great dad.
and I was a sober dad. My children, my oldest boy was 4 years old when I came home from Karen. So all of their life, they had a sober dad. And that, and when I met Kathy on our first date, our blind date, we're sitting there in this restaurant, and I was taken with her immediately. Well, first of all, she was a beautiful young woman when she worked in the same place. And so I'm sitting across from her, and I said, I hope this doesn't, drink order came over.
Right, of course.
What would you like to drink? And I said, just a minute. I told the waitress, I said, Kathy, I hope you won't be offended by this or that it'll bother you. I said, but I don't drink.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to be ordering anything alcoholic. And she said to me, wow, isn't this refreshing? And I thought, whoa, that's pretty good. Mm-hmm. So, and I don't know how I got on that, but all of these things that have happened are all a result of sobriety.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
We really appreciate it.
Why don't you tell people that we probably have some suggestions, some requests, some ideas. What do you want to tell our viewers what you want them to do?
If you liked it, like it. If you want to subscribe, we'd love that. We'd love for you to share it. But most importantly, if you're struggling, reach out. We're here for you. You can comment on a video, we'll see it, or you can send us an email through our website, which will be in the notes. So thank you so much for watching, and until next time.
We'll see you next time.